Nobody told Kobe Bryant that Christmas was supposed to mean something. He already knew. He had known since the summer, since the press conferences, since the photographs of Shaquille O'Neal in a Miami Heat uniform, smiling the smile of a man who had made a decision and was entirely comfortable with it. December 25, 2004 was not circled on any official calendar. It did not need to be. The statement had come months earlier, in that particular way that powerful men deliver verdicts. Not shouted, not argued, simply stated. The way you state something you believe so completely that the possibility of its opposite has stopped being interesting. Shaquille O'Neal looked at a camera and said what he believed. Kobe cannot win without me. 4 words. The kind of sentence that lands differently depending on where you are standing when you hear it. If you were standing anywhere in the basketball world in the summer of 2004, you were probably nodding. The logic was clean. 3 championships, 3 finals MVPs. The architecture of those Lakers teams had been built around Shaquille's body, his gravity, the way defenses collapsed toward him and created the geometry that everyone else used. Remove the center of that gravity, and what remained was, by most calculations, a team without a center. What those calculations missed was something that could not be entered into any spreadsheet. What they missed was what Kobe Bryant did with silence. Not the silence of someone who has nothing to say. The silence of someone who has decided that what needs to be said will be said in a language that does not use words. He was in the gym before anyone arrived, and he was there after everyone left, and the people who saw him there, the custodial staff, the security guards who walked the building at hours when the rest of the city was asleep. They mentioned it later in the way that witnesses mention things they observed without understanding their significance at the time. He was always here. That was what they said. Always. The word that means something different when it is said about a man who has already achieved what most players spend entire careers chasing, and who is still there, alone, at 5 in the morning, working on a move he had already made 10,000 times because 10,000 was not yet enough. Phil Jackson had returned to coach the Lakers that season. He had seen greatness from a distance close enough to understand its texture, had built championships around players whose singular brilliance had also been questioned, had learned that the most dangerous version of an elite competitor is the version that has been told what they cannot do by someone they have reasons to want to prove wrong. He watched Kobe through those early months with the attention of a man reading a text he has encountered before in a different language. He recognized the sentences. He knew where this was going. The Miami Heat arrived in Los Angeles on Christmas morning carrying everything the narrative required them to carry. Shaquille was playing some of the best basketball of his life, which was a specific kind of statement because the best basketball of Shaquille O'Neal's life had the quality of weather, something you did not argue with, something you prepared for and endured. Dwyane Wade was 22 years old and moving through basketball with the loose electricity of someone who has not yet had enough time to learn fear. The Heat were the story. Their arrival in Los Angeles on Christmas Day carried the particular weight of a return, of a reckoning, of something that people who follow sports recognized instinctively as a moment where the game would be asked to settle what the words had left open. The Staples Center that morning had a quality in the air that regular season games do not usually produce. There is a specific density to the atmosphere of a building when the crowd understands, collectively and without needing to discuss it, that what they are about to watch matters in ways the standings cannot fully account for. It is not simply louder. It is more present, more conscious of the fact that memory is being made and that memory requires witnesses. Kobe Bryant went through his warm-up with the same movements he always used, the same sequence, the same expression that people who did not know him sometimes read as coldness, and that people who did know him understood as concentration so complete it had become indistinguishable from calm. He was not cold, he was gathered. There is a difference that only becomes visible in the first minutes of competition when the gathering becomes action. Shaquille watched him from the other end of the court with the attention of a man who knows the person he is watching better than almost anyone alive. They had played beside each other for years. They had won together in ways that neither could have won alone, which is the truth about those championships that the summer statement had simplified into something cleaner and more convenient but less accurate. Shaquille knew what Kobe looked like before a game where Kobe had decided something. He looked like this. The first quarter unfolded with the careful intelligence of elite professionals who understand that 48 minutes is not a sprint. Shaquille settled into the post with the inevitability of geography. Wade threading through the Laker defense with that electric unpredictability that made him so difficult to account for. The Lakers responded with their own structure, the triangle operating as Phil Jackson's system always operates when its players trust it, not as a play, but as a language, a shared grammar that generates options faster than defenses can close them. Kobe was efficient in the first quarter without being conspicuous. 7 points on 5 possessions, each score with the quality of something selected rather than forced. His teammates noticed this. The men who had spent 6 months playing beside him without Shaquille, who had learned to read his rhythm through repetition, recognized what was happening. He was not warming up. He was reading. He was building the picture of the defense, cataloging its habits, finding the 3 or 4 places where its logic would eventually break down and filing them for later. At halftime, the game was within 3, and the conversation everywhere had not yet committed to a direction. The analysts who had spent the morning on the side of the narrative were now explaining why the second half would reveal structural truths the first half had obscured. They deferred to the future, to the quarter that would clarify, to the final minutes that would confirm. They are sometimes right. Sometimes the game does what the morning predicted. Sometimes it does something else entirely. Kobe came out for the second half, and Phil Jackson, watching him walk through the tunnel, said nothing. There are coaches who speak at every available moment because the speaking is itself a kind of control. Phil Jackson had long ago learned that there are players for whom the coach's highest contribution is the quality of the silence he provides. Kobe knew what he needed to do. He had known since warm-ups. The halftime had been 12 minutes of confirmation. The third quarter opened, and within 4 minutes, something shifted in the way things shift when the cause is real, not dramatically, not with the single moment that television constructs around, but with the gradual irreversibility of a tide. Kobe found the first gap in the Miami defense, a half step of hesitation at the top of the key that existed for approximately 1 second before it would have closed, and he was through it and at the rim before the second had finished. 2 possessions later, he went left, a direction the scouting report had identified as less comfortable, and he moved with a fluency that made the scouting report look like a document about someone else. Then a pull-up jumper from 17 feet, released at a point in the shot clock where most players would have been looking for a teammate, and the ball went through with that particular arc that people who watched Kobe Bryant for 20 years learned to recognize the way you learn to recognize a specific person's handwriting. Shaquille O'Neal, standing in the paint, watched this and stood still for 1 second longer than the transition required. Something was being processed in that second that would take longer than 1 second to finish, but that had begun and could not unbegin. The fourth quarter was the confirmation of something already decided, though it did not feel that way to the people inside it because nothing that is already decided feels that way from the inside. Kobe scored 19 points in 12 minutes, and each score had the specific quality of someone executing a plan formed long before the game began, formed in those early morning sessions in the empty gym, in the hundreds of hours that the Christmas lights and the cameras and the 30,000 people in that building had not witnessed and could not fully account for, even as they witnessed its results. The Lakers won by 9. The final score was the least important fact about what had happened. In the visitors' locker room afterward, Shaquille sat longer than the reporters outside expected. When he emerged, he was composed with the composure of a man who has spent his entire adult life in front of cameras and has learned to wear composure naturally, as a first layer, rather than a last resort. He answered questions about adjustments and execution. He used the language that professional athletes have developed over decades of post-game press conferences for exactly this purpose, to satisfy the formal requirement of the moment without opening the interior of it to examination. He did not address the statement. No one asked him directly. But there was something in how he moved through that room, a quality to the composure that people who had covered him for years would describe as recalibrated. The way an instrument is recalibrated when the measurements it has been making are revealed to be slightly off in ways that change the meaning of everything they measured. He had believed what he said. The belief had been built on real evidence, on 3 championships, on the undeniable physical reality of what his presence meant. The belief was not wrong exactly. It was incomplete. And incompleteness, when it involves something you have stated publicly with the full weight of your certainty, produces a specific kind of interior weather that does not resolve in a single evening. Kobe spoke to reporters for 9 minutes. He talked about the system, about his teammates, about second-half adjustments. He was asked whether this game felt different from others, and he paused in the way he paused when a question had reached something real and said, "Every game feels exactly as different as the preparation for it was." Then he left, and the reporters wrote their stories with the score and the statistics, and almost none of them wrote the thing that Phil Jackson would tell a journalist 3 years later was the actual story of that evening. What Phil said was this: what happened on Christmas 2004 was not a performance. He had seen Kobe perform, had seen him rise to moments with the electricity of an elite athlete responding to pressure in real time. He knew what that looked like. What he saw that evening was different. What he saw was a player who had spent 11 months preparing a specific answer to a specific question, and who delivered it not with urgency, but with the calm of someone reading from a text memorized so completely that the reading is indistinguishable from speaking. The preparation had become the person. The work had been absorbed into the body so fully that it expressed itself without effort, without the quality of someone showing what they have. Just a player playing, and the playing being, quietly and completely, the answer. The years that followed wrote their own history. The championships in 2009 and 2010, the scoring titles, the late-game moments that became a specific and irreplaceable vocabulary in the language of what basketball can be when a human being commits to it with a totality that most people apply to nothing in their entire lives. None of that was born on Christmas 2004, but something was confirmed that day that needed to be confirmed. Not for the world would take its time, but for the question itself. The question had been asked with the full sincerity of someone who believed the answer was already known. The game answered in the only language that questions like that deserve. Not argument, not rhetoric, but action. Sustained and precise and finally, unmistakably clear. Shaquille O'Neal is one of the greatest players in the history of basketball. This is not a consolation. It is simply true in the way that the best facts are true, without requiring anything to be false in order to remain standing. He is also a man who said something that a Christmas game proved was not the complete picture. In the years since, he has extended to Kobe the acknowledgement that the game itself had already delivered, said in various forms and with the grace of a large man who has learned that the size of a gesture is not measured in the same units as the size of a body, that Kobe was one of the best who ever played, that the Christmas game was something, that he remembered it. The lights were still up in Los Angeles when the final buzzer sounded, the kind that stay longer than they should because December is dark and light. Even borrowed, even temporary, makes the dark feel navigable. Somewhere across the city, in a gym that would open again before most of the city had finished dreaming, the floor was waiting. It had always been waiting. And Kobe Bryant, driving home through streets quiet in the way Christmas streets are quiet, already knew he would be there when it opened. He had always been there. That was the part the statement had not accounted for. The work that happens when no one is watching. The hours that leave no record except in the body of the person who kept them. The preparation that eventually and inevitably becomes the player, becomes the game, becomes the answer that arrives on a Christmas afternoon in front of a world that had been told what to expect and received instead something true.